What do you make of President Trump's apparent silence so far toward the possible bill against Russia and, of course, Russia's retaliation so far?
Well, I think more broadly, his general silence compared to his lack of silence on other issues, in particular on the Twitter platform, is nothing short of baffling to most observers in Washington and probably around the world. It's really hard to understand. On one hand, you could make an argument that it's strategic. In other words, he lets, like other presidents, he lets his advisors, other senior officials play the bad guy, and then he gets to play, in some ways, the good guy and maybe close a deal on new arrangements in the future. But in general, it's baffling, and there's no end to the speculation and curiosity of this riddle of why President Trump, who is so vociferous on every other issue, including with China, is completely silent on this question of Russia's actions in the election and in Ukraine.
Mr. Lukin, though, the president in the U.S. still have the power to veto the bill. Of course, we see a majority of both of the House of Representatives and also the Senate have already approved it. So he's probably have to go through his really not too much political capital in order to do that. Do you think the Russian side would call on the U.S. president to do so, to veto the bill?
Well, first of all, I'm not a psychologist, I'm a political scientist, so I'm not sure what American president is going to do.
Okay,
and,
fair enough.
Secondly, Russia is not going to ask for anything because we are not dealing with personalities, we are dealing with a country. The president is representing a country, the Congress also represents the country, so whatever they do, we are going to deal with that. The thing is that, but as a political scientist, I can say that it's useless to veto the bill because you need 2/3 of the Congress to overrun it, and they have enough votes. So it's if he vetoes the bill politically, it would be just it will be overrun. It will be a humiliation for him, and there is no use. So I don't think that he's going to do it.
Many people are curious whether this is a real fight back by President Putin against the U.S. to reduce the number of the embassy staff inside Russia and also take away 2 properties for diplomatic uses by the United States in Russia, or actually it's just one of those gestures Russia would make to show to the United States what Russia would do. Mr. Lukin, what is exactly your interpretation? Real fight back or just a gesture?
Well, this answer was not an answer to the sanctions as such. This was an answer to what President Obama did before he left the office, when he expelled 35 Russian diplomats and also denied access to some Russian facilities. So this was an answer to that. And, but it was not direct answer, because Russia did not send back 35 people. It just the problem was not that. With the United States, Russia had an agreement of 1992, which lifted limits to the staff of the embassy, of both embassies, and the United States violated it by denying visas for new Russian diplomats. When Russia wanted to send new diplomats in the place of those who were expelled, they denied the visas. So so Russia thought that they violated this agreement. So we said, if we don't have this agreement anymore, so we should have equal numbers.
Okay.
So we are going to have equal numbers. I think the number is 455.
All right, we got the record straight, at least from the Russian side. Mr. Pavel, of course, you work for the Obama administration. Earlier, your colleague, Mr. Lukin from Russia, suggesting it was in response to what the Obama administration was doing years ago.
Yeah, you know, I think it's better for the conversation here. There's so many issues to focus on the broad things. And in answer to your broad question, it's a gesture. I mean, this doesn't have a significant impact on the overall strategic relationship, although, as your reporter said, I think it will greatly, it could greatly affect the people-to-people exchanges and cultural and trade issues. So in some ways it's a little bit of a shot in the foot for Russia too, but I think there's bigger issues for us to discuss and for the two countries to discuss than this gesture.
All right. Let's focus on the bigger issue, which is really important. That is the relations between the United States and Russia. Will, as a result of President Trump's earlier approach of trying to create a more intimate relationship, now it's really bearing fruit, or rather going the other way, exactly the opposite? Your judgment here, Mr. Pavel.
Well, things are worse, clearly, since the end of the Obama administration. They're worse because of the repercussions of the Russian activity, whatever you want to call it. I call it an influence campaign, which is nothing new, but it just had new impact and new publicity. But I think they're worse because of the Russian influence campaign, and I think the way it's playing out, it's really Putin's. It's exceeding his highest hopes as a former intelligence officer, and so I think their relations aren't at their lowest point. They could go lower still. I could give you scenarios, but this is a relationship that has its ups and downs. It's a wave, and right now we're heading down. But I imagine there will be areas in the future, even in the first term, even in the next 3 years, where you could see it going up a slope. In particular, as the Trump administration looks to be increasing pressure on China. I don't think it wants to sort of be picking fights with China and Russia at the same time, so perhaps one could see an opening for the U.S. and Russia to cooperate together in various areas, sometime in 2018, 2019.
Very interesting, your perspective, the triangle relationship. But Professor Lukin, do you believe in that?
You mean like what? Like that the United States is trying to pressure both countries at the same time? I think it's a pretty mindless policy, but this was also the policy of President Obama. So President Trump has not changed anything. He wanted to change. At least he said that he wanted to change. He said that he wanted to improve relations with Russia during the campaign. But I think that he didn't really understand how hard it would do, and he was not allowed to do it. And now he either doesn't want to, but I think it's more realistically to say that he is not allowed to, because the entire elite, represented by the Congress, they just don't let him do anything. And the reason for these sanctions, for this bill, was actually more internal. The reason was that the Congress wanted to limit the power of the president. Now he cannot lift the sanctions by himself. So I'm not sure if he is able to do it in 2 or 3 years' time.
Yeah.
I don't think so. If we remember some other sanctions against the Soviet Union, they were there for like 20 or 30 years, and it took only the collapse of the Soviet Union. Right. Even after the collapse, we had to wait like 10 or 15 years. So I don't think that our relations can improve in the foreseeable future.
Mr. Pavel, you want to respond briefly about that?
Yeah, just to be clear, I wasn't suggesting that the sanctions would be lifted within 2 or 3 years, but I was suggesting that we analysts and former officials tend to be not as good as we should be about predicting future trends in various aspects of international affairs. I include myself in that, and so I don't think you can rule out the chance of, we're heading down the slope now and relations are getting worse, right. But okay. You can imagine once things settle, different conditions, they could go up.
Well, very interesting discussion. And now we are joined by another guest coming originally from China. He is Mr. Xiyu, who is the Senior Research Fellow from the China Institute of International Studies. Mr. Yang, welcome to our program. Earlier, our 2 other panelists from Russia and the U.S. been talking about whether Russia-U.S. relationship are going to sway a bit because of U.S.-China relationship. What do you make of this triangle? Is it really a realistic triangle that we're talking about here?
Yes, there are indeed a strategic triangle already here in the international relations. However, it's not an equal triangle. With the worst and the worst of the relationship between Russia and the U.S. and the same worst direction happened in the China-U.S. relation. But that doesn't mean that will input the momentum for the improvement with Russia and the U.S. Relation, because the contradictions and the differences between the Russia and the U.S. Were produced by their bilateral relation rather than by the China and the U.S. And basically, China-Russia relation will go through a stable and a cooperative shape. However, both U.S.-China and the Russia-U.S. will go through a difficult period.
I see. But I want to come back to some of the talking points earlier, Mr. Lukin and also Mr. Pavel. For example, what exactly is the nature of this relationship right now between the United States and Russia? You know, what is going on with the diplomatic compounds, the cutting of the diplomatic staff? We all know that it's gesture. We all understand from both sides. But the important thing is, Professor Lukin, for example, from Russia, how much the U.S. is working with the countries in Europe, and particularly in the neighborhood of Russia. We also heard the recent joint exercises with Georgia, and also we heard some of the other EU countries joined in. So exactly to Russia, what is the most important strategic interest that we are talking about here?
Well, we are still cooperating in some areas with the United States, like space research, for example, or several others. But generally, we have very low trade, almost insignificant, and so the main interest for Russia is strategic with the United States, like global issues. Because the United States is still the most powerful country.
Right.
As for Europe, I think that the United States is now much more comfortable with new members of the European community, the former Soviet bloc countries, like Poland and some others, Baltic states. But it's less and less comfortable and has more and more divisions with traditional Europe, with France, Germany, and actually these sanctions are also kind of directed against European business. So there is a lot of dissatisfaction in Europe about it.
On the other hand, Mr. Pavel, the United States still needs Russia in terms of, for example, Syria issue and some of the other strategic ones going on in the world. By the way, Russia, of course, in the permanent 5 of the UN Security Council, North Korea, some of the other issues, you need Russia's participation and even support. Mr. Pavel, how much do you think Washington will really drag away its relationship with Moscow? To what extent it will come back again? Of course, you're not good at predicting, you just mentioned earlier, but I do still want your assessment.
Well, the question you just answered, we could spend hours. I won't, but I mean, the kind of help, quote unquote, that Russia's been providing on Syria, on North Korea, on the UN Security Council, I don't think we need that kind of help. The Security Council is paralyzed. Syria is an unmitigated global disaster. Russia isolated itself on North Korea by saying that, well, we don't think that missile really was that significant.
Mr. Pavel, you don't need the support, or you think that you are not going to receive the support. Those are two very different things.
I'm saying Russia is in these fora and in these arenas, but they have been blocking solutions at every